Thank you, Professor Hughes. I talked to Henry Turley yesterday, and I told him that I had the honor of being here tonight and reminded him of why it was important that he supported this institution, why it's important that he supports Memphis, and why it's important that people like him commit and engage and have the courage to speak up and spend some money in this community. And then I asked him for a gift for the National Civil Rights Museum. And those of you who know me know it went something like that, right? It is an honor to be here. I am excited about this conversation. I am going to do something initially that I don't normally do, and people who I've worked with know that I don't follow directions very well. So I'm going to read a couple things because I want to get it right and make sure you all understand what we're doing here tonight and why we're doing it. And then we're going to have some conversation with a rock star. The Tennessee Democracy Forum, who in conjunction with the Lynne and Henry Turley Memphis Center is producing this tonight, is a nonpartisan effort formed to increase the public debate about democracy in Tennessee and to make the case for a pro-democracy agenda in the state. Are y'all listening? Yeah. Last year, the Democracy Forum sponsored 6 conversations on democracy with leading journalists, scholars, and practitioners, including Bill Kristol, former Governor Christie, Todd Whitman, and Ambassador Norm Eisen. Earlier this year, the Democracy Forum sponsored a conversation focused on the constitutional issues raised by the expulsion of members of the Tennessee State Legislature. Tonight, I am thrilled to welcome our guest, Maya Wiley, to the Democracy Forum and to Rhodes College. Ms. Wiley is the president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. Let me say that one more time because y'all weren't listening. Ms. Wiley is the president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. Do you know what that means? Think about the work she has to do every single day. She has received numerous awards and been a public voice on rights, justice, and democracy through written opinion, editorials, and a former NBC News and MSNBC legal analyst. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Ms. Wiley. So there's a lot of, this is where I break away from what I was told to do. There's so much we can talk about. I want to make sure everybody understands. We're going to allow for some questions certainly at the end, but I want to spend the next half hour or so speaking to Ms. Wiley, asking her some questions in a couple fundamental areas. The new republic, the state of Tennessee, and the state of democracy, not necessarily disconnected. So, Ms. Wiley, earlier this year, you wrote a piece in the New Republic. You argued that the New York County indictment of former President Trump was evidence that our system of justice was working. 5 months later, the former president is now under indictment. In that same article, you linked criticism of the New York County case to racism and anti-Semitism, noting attacks on Alvin Bragg. And you can say more about that. And now Congressman Jim Jordan has launched an investigation against a black prosecutor, Fannie Willis, who has led the investigation in Fulton County, and we're talking about Georgia. Talk a little bit about the continuing connection between the attacks on the justice system and racism and anti-Semitism. Boy, this is a Rhodes College kind of question.
Well, first off, I have to say, Dr. Wigginton, it's a pleasure and a privilege to be here. I'm grateful for all of you and your presence and what that presence represents. and I'm extremely, extremely excited to be a support in any way to the Tennessee Democracy Project. Democracy has to live everywhere to live. It's a big question, and it's a simple answer, despite its complexity. And let me say why. When a powerful few desire to not only hold on to that power, but to hold on to it despite the design of government and the voice of the people, and to do it by driving division, particularly division designed to incite hate. We don't just have a problem, we have a potential democratic crisis. It is not new for the country, and I don't have to tell you that, but it is one that we had worked very hard to transcend. And when I say very hard, I am talking generations. And we made significant progress. And what we see from political leadership, from people who have been lent, I try to remind people, you don't have power, we lent it to you. We lent it to you, and we're supposed to have the power to take it back. But when you try to tell us that the institutions of our democracy, however flawed, and we know they are, but nonetheless are doing what they are supposed to do, and you try to mask your raw effort to hold on to it by trying to tell people George Soros is part of a cabal. George Soros, the Holocaust survivor. George Soros, the financier who has put his money on the line to support democracy in this country and abroad, almost more than any other wealthy individual. And that's a matter of public record and fact. You don't have to like him, you don't have to agree with him, but it is a fact. Open society is about democracy everywhere. And you use that to argue that there's a cabal that put a black man in place, the first black district attorney in the history of Manhattan. Y'all know where Harlem is? I thought you did. In the history of Manhattan. But because he's applying the law to a wealthy white man in the same way that it gets applied to everyone who has been picked up by a police officer for a misdemeanor of possession of marijuana, that he gets equated to a Jewish financier who he never even met with, to suggest that he's being railroaded. I just think it's pretty simple. I shared a few details not to make it complicated, but actually to make it simple. It is hiding the horror of abuse of power behind hate. It's that simple.
All righty. I can't help but to follow that up in thinking about approximately a week ago, the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington and what that march was about. We often leave out the jobs and freedom part, but that's what the march was about. And we happened to focus on Dr. King, appropriately so, but there were many other people at that march speaking to the world. So there's 250,000 or so people there, but it was on TV at a time where watching TV was not something everybody did in the same way, and there were far fewer channels. So there had a lot of attention there. And if we just think about what you said just now and think about the core messages that were being articulated 60 years ago and the subsequent, to your point, generational attempts to be our best selves, to have that in question in this moment is a it's sort of hard to digest. And so when I think about that dynamic, how do you, this is not on my script, how do you...
Well, you are unscriptable. You admitted that.
How do you, in that context, leading the organization that you lead, how are you able to navigate and negotiate across the spectrum of this country as effectively as you do?
Well, thank you. I don't know if I do effectively. I certainly hope so. So I was at the march, spoke at the march. I'm going to say something that doesn't actually answer your question, but I am going to share this because it was a very emotional moment for me, because I was telling some people my parents were civil rights organizers. They were in Syracuse, New York, where my father was on faculty as a black man who had a PhD in organic chemistry. My mother had been a grad student, not in his department. Don't get the wrong. Don't get it twisted. My father was black. My mother was white. They got married in 1961. They got married quickly for all the obvious reasons. And they organized a chapter of the Congress on Racial Equality. Mm-hmm. James Farmer wasn't at the March on Washington because he was in jail. My father did not attend the March on Washington because he and their other chapter members of the Syracuse chapter of CORE were blocking bulldozers that were coming to bulldoze black housing in downtown Syracuse as part of urban renewal that were not going to get replaced. And they were listening to, it was a conscious decision. They did send some buses, so they sent some folks from the community, but they stayed to block the bulldozers and listen to the march on the radio. So when I was there, and the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights is 73 years old, founded in 1950 by the NAACP, Roy Wilkins, by A. Philip Randolph. There was a meeting with the A. Philip Randolph state chapter earlier today, Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, and Arnie Aronson, mm-hmm. who was one of the most important Jewish leaders in the country at the time. And standing up there, thinking about the fact that I was now holding, with everyone else there, the responsibility of fighting to get back mm-hmm. what it took us hundreds of years to win, and a lot of lost lives. And what struck me about that, and about your question, is the real question is, are we standing up? And it actually matters everywhere we do it. It mattered that my parents didn't go and were standing up in Syracuse to block those bulldozers. And it mattered also for all the people who actually went to show that they were standing up, on those stairs in front of Abraham Lincoln's statue. And the other thing we need to remember about that is the students. Because the primary reason there were 250,000 people there was because of college students particularly black college students in the South, who were putting their lives on the line every single day, including that young John Lewis who spoke from that podium and had his speech altered and watered down. They changed his speech. His words were pretty much the same message, but I think about that a lot today, because when you ask that question, Dr. Wigginton, what comes to mind is, really, I don't know that I do it well. I know it just matters that we try. And the only way to try well is in a compassionate, empathetic, truth-telling, principled way. And I honestly learned that from my parents and did not know that's what they had taught me, until we've gotten here.
That sounds like good parenting to me.
Well, it was parenting by example, but I'll give you the because what I've learned is, and the Trump era really has reinforced this. And being on MSNBC was actually an important opportunity for this. Is, there are people I thought I would never talk to in life, let alone talk to pleasantly, who I'm sitting in green rooms with, agreeing about the danger to our democracy, the importance of standing up to our institutions, and the absolute abhorrence of hate and bias and how it's being driven. And those people are people I consider to be very deeply conservative and people with whom I could not speak before Donald Trump. And the reason that's important to recognize is there are 100 issues I will never agree with them on, even today. But yet, it has given us the opportunity to have that conversation in a different way about what they don't understand about our experiences and what we need to hear about where their experiences come from that formed their views. Not because it may lead to complete agreement, but it creates the opportunity to actually get back to progress we made when we share principles that are democratic and that say we shouldn't be divided, and we should not let anyone divide us intentionally along racial lines, along religious lines, and along all those various forms of diversity that should be seen as a strength to democracy. And all I can say is that I've learned the importance of trying to embody that in a way that is truth-telling.
No, I appreciate that answer. And you referenced in a couple different ways the importance of young people, in particular college students. And I'm thinking about today's college student and the 5 to 7 year window before of them becoming college students that preceded this moment, and what our world's been like, and how in relation to college students of the era, the civil rights era, like the almost juxtaposing those two types of experiences. And the continued importance, however, of young people today, which I'm not sure we emphasize enough. You've been talking to young leaders today, I know, and you do all the time. What are some core messages you have for them as they are learning, developing their strategies, their tools, their missteps? What are some things you need and want them to know and understand? And quite frankly, the rest of us, what do we need to know and understand about them?
Whew, good questions. And by the way, I'm also the proud parent of a 22-year-old and 19-year-old. So I also have these conversations at home. There's something that's so important about activism that is really important for us to both be in conversation with, about recognizing the critical power and importance of this generation that is in college right now to make deep, meaningful change for our democracy. And that comes in a couple of different forms. One, when you look at viewpoints and openness, this generation, Generation Z, the college generation today, is actually extremely principled, extremely concerned, and demanding of more democracy, demanding of more inclusion, significantly more open to gender identity and its fluidity, of the reality of what we'll call intersectionality, which just means people are people and they get to say who they are and be all that they are, and that ain't simple, that ain't straightforward, and it's true of all of us. And the most important and central value to democracy is we do get to define ourselves and be who we are. And that is like an incredible strength in its own right. But that also, if you look demographically, this is the most diverse generation. But it is also the generation in sheer size. You know, one of the shifts that's happening in this country used to be boomers, right? That's why I know, right? Nothing to be ashamed of. Don't let it make you shame. But, you know, is that the boomer generation had so defined our politics for so many years and was predominantly white, right? And look, that doesn't mean there's not diversity of viewpoint or of experience. I'm just saying it was predominantly white. This generation is not. But the shift is the boomer generation is no longer the majority of the voting population. Within a few years, if you combine Gen Z and millennials at 18 to 35, that is almost now and very soon a third of the electorate. That's why in every single place we saw in the midterms that saw despite being purple states, shifted a trifecta on rights issues. It's because of the demographic power of the generation, which is different even from my generation, where we might have been in college doing what we were doing. We were not that level of power at the polls if we show up. Power in defining the political debate if we're engaged in it. So I'm just saying that's a lot of power. It's a lot of power, and I am struck by how many of our college students need to be told that that is true. Not because they're ignorant, because there is a difference between it being true and it being said. The importance of saying, y'all, everybody in this room between 18 and 35, raise your hand. You have the power to define the debate. And the other thing I'll say
I think what she said is, y'all ain't got no money, but y'all still got all the power. Has that ever happened before? Is that?
Didn't happen for me.
I don't think that's ever happened
before. No, this is a historic shift. But the reason it's so important, because it's a historic shift, is think about if those SNCC activists had your numbers. Think about that. And for all the rest of you, because you're this is the coalition. Every last one of you is not Gen X and Gen Z. But you're here. This is exactly why I can get up and say, we are the majority of this country. We are the majority of this country. Our viewpoints, our principles, and our presence. So, but here's the other side, flip side of this coin. Mm-hmm. If you talk to anybody who got their ass beat within an inch of their life in 1950s and 1960s, I'm going to tell you what they would tell you. And I say that because I grew up with some of them. They knew the key was not to respond with violence, that it was okay to be angry, but the anger had to voice not stridency, but principle. It was bold. It was radical at the time. But there's a difference between boldness and radicalness and stridency. The difference is it has a plan and a purpose that is beneficial to everyone, and that is offered in the spirit of that shared benefit.
You just made me think about James Lawson. He modeled that. He trained college students to have the courage to be nonviolent, and he wasn't the only one, but he was a principal. And I'm just thinking about him still being alive, all the things he saw and witnessed, and frankly his power over young people still to this day. I'm still back on the articulation of the power of the 18 to 35-year-old that I don't think I've seen articulated as clearly as you did in our narrative right now. And I just think that could be that has such richness to it. I would love to see how that unfolds through the creativity and the ways that college students today can determine what makes the front page and what's determined to be important, because they can do it in a way that the rest of us probably cannot.
Can I share a story about this?
Sure.
And listen, there was no magic here. I have a godson who grew up in public housing, 6'3", dark skin, lots of police trauma, lots of it. I personally had to go to court with him twice on arrest warrants for things like skateboarding in the subway, things that would put him in jail if he didn't appear on time. No criminal record. He was registered to vote in 16, and he didn't vote. I tried to get him to go to the polls. He didn't vote, and he said, "It doesn't matter what I do. It doesn't matter if I show up." I took that experience with him, and I did right before the 2022 midterms. I was going to Northern Virginia Community College, which is predominantly students of color, first-generation college, very diverse, lots of immigrant students, very diverse, first generation, and it was on race relations, and I decided to talk about what it meant, the power of the vote, but not just how we fought for it, not just that it was not given, it was demanded, and the importance of students who made those demands and won that victory, often with their blood. But I turned it because of him, because of those conversations with him. I turned it to this, what I just said here. I had no idea if it would work. I just wanted them to hear that they had power, even when they get beat down by the police, even when they can't pay their rent, even when their parents get disrespected, even if they're on welfare, even if their parents are on welfare, even if they have whatever the circumstances, knowing all those circumstances were in the room. And at the end of it, and it was an incredibly emotional It was emotional for me because I was like, I just need y'all to go vote. But not just to vote for the act. It's not just because you can say you had the sticker. It's because, and I told them, I said, I ran for mayor. Let me tell you something. If politicians don't even go to try to get your vote when you don't show up and they don't see you as a frequent voter, they don't even show up. And you're sitting here complaining about it doesn't matter what you do because they won't show up. They don't show up because they don't see you in their data that says you go to the poll. It ain't just that you pulled the, I know it used to be a lever. Okay, I'm dated. Right now we slide it in the scanner. But the point is, but I said that to them. And then I talked about the difference between 2016 and 2020 or 2008. You can imagine what I said. At the end of it, there was a young black man who did not vote in 2020 because he voted in 2016 and it was not the outcome he expected. And he said, so it didn't matter. And after I told him what I told them, he said he went and voted in the midterms. And that is why we have to talk about it plain.
Yeah.
We have to talk about it plain and translate in it, not vote because it matters. Vote because it's your power and because they can't ignore you because you can put them out.
Yes, indeed. So I want to shift to Tennessee in particular. And we have... We've been in the national news about our legislature, and it's real, and led by our two Justins, and what they've done, and how they did it, perhaps, in the context of a state where they are in the overwhelming minority. And I'm not going to say much more than that. I would just love to hear you speak to that dynamic, whether it be in Tennessee or anywhere else, how these kind of situations play themselves out on stage, if you will.
We all own Justins. I just want to say, I mean, it actually inspired beyond Tennessee. Because the experience, and the Glorias. I don't like leaving out the Glorias. I do not want to leave out the Glorias. Because that mattered. Alliedship matters. Standing up matters for each other. So the whole thing was but for all the reasons, in fact, made more powerful because it laid bare what we all believed was happening. Thanks to Gloria. Right? Because it just made it plain and undeniable. But I think the experience of it that was so universal was when you can't win, you rig. You rig the rules, which is anti-democratic. Or if you want to prevent real debate, you rig the rules. You use whatever tools you have as a minority to have power over, rather than using what you've been lent by the people and how they've demanded you use that power. So what was but I think that how it spoke explicitly to race and how race plays out to shatter democracy for everyone, because that is what that represented. It did allow, I think there was so much outrage, but also appreciation for standing up and for demonstrating why it matters to stand up. I mean, I just want to say that. Rules get rigged, standing up in the face of them and calling them for what they are, laying them bare, and being willing to accept, not accept the consequences in the sense of laying down, accept the consequences in knowing that you're creating another fight, right? Accept the consequence of a fight rather than capitulating to avoiding it. And what I've heard today, because I was meeting with leaders today earlier and being here, is that it actually did help because there's a lot of self-censorship in the face of power. That groups, organizations, leaders do self-censor. And power is used intentionally to create that self-censorship. And it absolutely laid bare what racism does, how it hurts everyone, not just those, and why the allyship matters. But what I am hearing from organizations is it did also help to make some others brave.
Yep. No, I appreciate that, and it leads me to a more abstract question, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on strategy and thinking about when to be subtle and when to be over the top, just way over the top. Like, how do you, in the context of making change, how do you determine how to go about it from a strategic standpoint?
Trial and error. And I do mean that. Like,
I think that's important to say.
It is. No, it is. Look, Montgomery bus boycott.
Yeah,
that wasn't the first one.
That was not the first one.
Baton Rouge. And in fact, if Dr. King hadn't been friends with the pastor in Baton Rouge that tried it last week, learned the lessons of why it didn't work. Not that it was a bad idea, but what they had to know that they didn't know. But the fact that they did it and tried it meant they learned some things that they could pass forward, like cars are going to break down. You need someone to buy some new cars or get the cars fixed. I had a donor in New York, Jewish, who could help put some more cars on the road. That's why it could last a year and not 2 weeks. The nonviolence, training of nonviolence. Like, there were so many elements, but we could talk about Rosa Parks. Like, the whole thing, the point was it was intentional. It was planned. It was considered around, and I do think this is always important, is what's the thing a broader audience can get? Right? Because we're always trying to help others see what they may not otherwise understand. Not because they're bad people, because they just don't walk in our shoes, right? There are lots of whose shoes I don't walk in. So what helps us to see the experiences that we may not share? But part of it is thinking about everybody can understand the buses. Buses were a common denominator for a lot of people, but it was also that they understood the power that they would wield if they boycotted, right? So they would have visuals, but they also, if they boycotted, knew it would hurt the purse strings of the system. So it wasn't just theater. It was they understood the pain point. They understood where and how they could create the pain. Those things had to be coupled, but then it had to be coupled with the relationships to make it sustainable. Yeah. And that was the buying the cars from an important allied donor who was willing to pay for the cars to be replenished. And then there were the optics, because as we know, Rosa Parks was not the original person to sit down. But they realized the young black woman who was pregnant would not be sufficient. This is hard to say, right? Because it's kind of offensive. Why shouldn't it matter just because she was single and young and pregnant? Why shouldn't it be as powerful that she sit down? But the political realities of helping people relate, including the black middle class, with truth be told, including the black middle class, is who is the best person to embody and make relatable that. Now, that doesn't mean she was the only one, and it was a plan, as we know it. Anybody tell you Rosa Parks got tired one day, school them.
Yeah. We do that at the museum every single day.
The only thing she was tired of was racism.
Yeah.
But they had a plan.
Yeah.
So, but I think those ingredients are important, but it's also like we got to try and fail.
Yeah.
But failure is not failure. We have to try and experiment. That's a better word. We have to try and experiment and know. Here's another story. Fight for 15. Fight for 15. When did that start? Come on, y'all. So we have some students and some faculty in here. Obama was president. That's a hint. Hashtag. Okay, doesn't matter. Here's my point. You would probably, if you would like go back and look at your news stories, but you know what it was. It's after the Great Recession. Low-wage workers started organizing. Obama was talking about a $10 minimum wage, and they said, "Hail to the nah." Can I say that in school? Okay. And they said, no, 15, hashtag 15. Everybody thought they were insane because Obama was pro-minimum wage. He was just doing. But let me tell you when that fight started. 1980 in Detroit. And it failed. And the organizers who organized it, who tried to organize Burger King workers, McDonald's workers in Detroit, knew why they failed, and they tried again when Obama was president. It was the same organizers. And they did it in Chicago and New York. The reason it was Chicago and New York was because those organizers from Detroit were now in Chicago and New York. So, just saying.
I think that's really powerful because something that we see a lot at the museum, and I'm sure in your work you do too, is there's this balance between telling the historical power of the movement and not romanticizing it, such that these folks every move was the right move, and they had some elegance about themselves and charm and charisma that just allowed them to weave their way through, and the trial and error shows up every day, and it shows up in setting themselves up to be in the place where they could get lucky sometimes or rely on those kind of relationships, such that in a place like Montgomery, when the irony is you've got these people who have very little money but are dictating the economy of an entire community, right? The housekeepers, right? So they're little nickels that they're no longer putting in to ride the bus changes the system. I mean, it's just a.
Everyone has power.
You can't make this up.
Yeah, but you have to find the power.
You have to find the power. Y'all better find the power.
No, y'all got it.
So part of the power is we're going to let you ask some questions. We've got about 15 minutes, and I want to make sure that there's time for you to ask your question of Miss Wiley. Yes, sir.
How do you get people to exercise their power in Tennessee? We have the worst voter turnout. How do we change that?
By having these conversations in the community. The key there's a lot of, and actually Y.T. Bell, who's sitting in the back, who actually is an expert in how we do this, particularly in communities where we don't get high participation rates. But really, honestly, often it is this feeling that it doesn't matter. And the ability to start to talk about, what do you care about, right? I mean, because like all things, it starts from what motivates people. So that it's responsive to that. But honestly, we have seen such incredible shifts by the fact that people are getting engaged, but getting engaged regularly. You know, one of the mistakes, and it's not a mistake of community leaders, it's a mistake of how we think about what engagement means. Engagement doesn't mean you show up right before it's time to vote. Engagement means we're having conversations about the problems in our communities and what we need to do and what our priorities are throughout the year, every year, election year or not. That's what actually gets people engaged. I mean, mostly like my godson, it's because people show up and say, you should go vote right before the election. He's like, but there is a big difference when there's more regular engagement and when people are able to engage on what they care about. So I know that sounds like a simple answer, and it's not. I mean, but it's really deeper than we think. And there are people doing it. So getting engaged really is helpful.
Yes, I appreciated your comment about making it plain. And if you think about the very baseline definition of democracy, this idea of members having equal power and the ability to hold its sovereigns or its representatives accountable, I'm wondering, like, when we have conversations like this, why don't we just kind of, as opposed to saying like a threat to democracy, say like making it plain means that we as citizens work to remove obstacles that impede membership equality, or we remove obstacles that limit its membership from being able to hold its representatives accountable. Like something that just like gets it sticky for folks of just like, this is what it means to be a threat to democracy. Anything that impedes our ability to be equal members, anything that impedes our ability to hold our representatives accountable. And
so, like all things, and the thing about conversations is some things work for some people and some things don't. What I would say is that would be making it plain for me, but I'm already voting. So when we say making it plain, and I give you a really good example, we were actually talking about this earlier in the forum with leaders when we were talking about what the issues are, and you have 500,000 people in this city, in this state, who are disenfranchised from voting because even though they've served their time, quote unquote, right? That won't work on them because it's not fundamental enough to their daily lives. And I think this is part of making it plain, and this is why conversation matters to get people engaged. So if you would ask my godson, I'm just using this because this is a perfect example, I'd say, well, what do you care about? What do you care about? What do you want to be different? Now, he's going to go to a lot of criminal justice issues because he's had really personal traumatic experiences. So if you say, well, okay, and he says, well, it doesn't matter what I do, but then I could say, okay, it doesn't matter what you do. But backing it up to, would it make a difference if there was a discipline if they did that to you? If they got punished the way you were getting punished, if they think you're doing wrong? And he'd say, yes. And say, well, who's their boss? Police commissioner. Okay, who's that person's boss? The mayor. Okay. You going to vote in the mayor's race? Because some people are saying they will be the boss that says there's discipline. That's a different conversation, right, than equality of opportunity to save democracy. Most people are just trying to make it through the day. So most democracy issues have to be broken. What is democracy? My mentor, longtime law professor John Powell, who's at Berkeley, I worked with him when he was head of the legal division of the ACLU, and he used to say, when he would teach, he'd say, what is democracy for? What's it for? And students would do just what I did and what you're doing, going, this is and he would say, but at the end, it's for people to solve their problems. So what problem are we trying to solve through democracy is what we need to talk about. And that's what saves democracy. Because what democracy ultimately is our collective ability to solve our problems.
Thank you. My name's Paul Klein, and you spoke earlier about the white ally in the civil rights movement. I consider myself a white ally in Memphis, Tennessee today, and a problem that I run into talking with other white people, I'm looking for a little advice with. I call it, and it's become a buzzword, whataboutism. I'm trying to talk to other white people about, maybe Trump, for example, and I'll hear, what about Hillary? What about Hunter Biden?
And his laptop.
Oh my God. That's what I struggle with. And I've been thinking about this since you said, talk to people about, ask them to consider someone else's experience, what it might be like to be in their shoes, for example. And that's when I run into that.
You know, it's the hardest thing to do. First of all, if we're having a political partisan conversation, we'll never get past the whatism. I'm just saying, we won't. And the breakthroughs tend to come, relationship matters. It just does. But one of the things that happens, and, you know, again, this was a lesson from my parents. My father in New York, trying to demonstrate to the head of the school board that actually school segregation was bad for students, and that black kids weren't getting served properly in the all-black school. Barry Goldwater, Republican. So not just so much so he was running for governor against a Rockefeller who was a Republican, but way too moderate for him. But what changed it was, what my father did was say, have a study commission, right? Now, normally you'd say, oh, like, the last thing we need is another study commission. But let me tell you how, right? Usually that's where change goes to die. But see, my father being an organizer, said he didn't organize it as that kind of study commission. He made Jake, with this guy's name Jake, was a very wealthy businessman in Syracuse, owned an electrical business and running for governor, very conservative, blood red conservative. Probably would have been a Trump supporter. And he says, you, and he said to my father, he said, you will never convince me that segregation hurts black students. And my father said, let me show you. Well, he was a little more arrogant than that. He said, I will make you see. But the way he did it wasn't to talk to him. I mean, he presented data and research, and data research was not going to work because the man's mind was made up, right? This is the empathy part. That doesn't get you to empathy. He said, come with me. And he said, you go apply for that apartment, and I'll go apply for that apartment. My father had a PhD in organic chemistry that he got in 1957 from Cornell University. He was in the chemistry department at the University of Syracuse. Obviously, to a man like Jacob, he said, you're going to get the apartment too. They went to several apartments. Every single time my father was declined, and every single time he was offered. And they went not as themselves, obviously, but with the same, right? And then he said, now come talk to me, because he started going through all the arguments that this man had about why schools, black students, all his arguments about why black students were failing that had to do with black students, not the system failing them. But instead of doing it, he said, okay. And he took them into some black homes. And he sat them down, and he said, talk to the mother. He said, don't talk to me, talk to her. And he went through that. And those mothers told them about the abuse their kids suffered, the low expectation, the ways in which they were forced into discipline or into special education. And by the end of it, Jake was said, segregation harms black students. They never became friends, but they respected each other. And Jaquith went on to run the state commissions that set out the plan to desegregate New York State schools.
Thank you. It's been a great conversation. Really appreciate your attentiveness and your insightful questions. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Ms. Wiley, for inspiring us.
What I will say is thank you for inspiring me. We inspire each other. And if you leave with anything, I hope you leave with knowing that we all matter. We all stand up together. It's our country, and we will be the change we need.
Thank you.